Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have a moral obligation to be good stewards of our nation's rich wildlife and ensure we can share these iconic species with generations of Americans to come. Protecting America's wildlife is something that is deeply important to me, and quite frankly, something my late husband, John Dingell, took to heart. He was an avid outdoorsman, angler, and hunter with a deep appreciation of our country's natural resources and strengthening our nation's conservation and environmental policies was a core value to him. In fact, as all of you know here, he was the lead author of the Endangered Species Act that was enacted 50 years ago. 10 years ago, on the Endangered Species Act's 40th anniversary, he warned of the dangers of partisan bickering and political agendas in undermining the survival of the ESA. And unfortunately, today's hearing is kind of an example of that. Contrary to this hearing's title, the ESA has really been successful in preventing the extinction of at-risk species. According to the Center for Biological Diversity, the ESA is credited with saving 99% of the species it protects from extinction. At a time when our nation is facing the compounding effects of climate change, habitat loss, pollution, and species overexploitation that all threaten the viability of many species of wildlife and plants, we need to redouble our conservation efforts, not undermine them. I really am concerned about the recent attacks on the ESA that were seen in the Congress, from attempts to congressionally delist imperiled species to attempts to hinder federal agencies' ability to protect species from extinction. And wildlife is paying a toll. A report has recently found that 49% of the bird species worldwide have declining populations. And one of the men said to me, butterflies are sissy things. Well, I don't think the monarch butterfly is, and we've seen it 85% in 2 decades. This should alarm all of us, but only represents a small fraction of the number of species in decline. So, Mr. Ash, I'm going to ask you a few questions. Today, there are over 1,600 domestic species listed as threatened or endangered under the ESA, yet we only hear about a handful of them. Why do only certain species in decline garner such emotional responses that lead to conflicts on the merits of ESA?
Well, my experience, Congresswoman Dingell, is the conflict and the notoriety. The species that generate the most conflict and the most notoriety are the ones where we wait till the last minute to really seriously address their conservation needs. And so we've heard a lot of discussion about proactive conservation measures, and I think that's really important, and certainly what reflected in the work that has been done on the greater sage grouse to try to get ahead of the species before it needs the protection of the Endangered Species Act. And so the species, I think, that get the most notoriety, generate the most conflict, are the ones that are in the most trouble, and where you have the least flexibility in protecting and conserving them.
So, if I understand you correctly, we know that over 99% of species under the ESA have not gone extinct, but when a species is caught too late, there are too few left to rebuild the species and limited options left for recovery. So, Mr. Ash, why are imperiled species like this in such bad shape?
Imperiled species like?
The 1%, the ones that we all fight about.
Again, mostly in my experience, those are species that are habitat-limited species. And we've heard, again, discussion about water. Water is habitat for something like the Delta smelt. And when its availability is limited, those are difficult issues to deal with. I worry about the polar bear, for instance. There are actually a lot of polar bears in the world today, over 20,000, but their habitat is going away. And we have no way to create sea ice habitat. And so it's those species where habitat is the limiting factor that are the most difficult ones to deal with.
I'm going to be out of time, Mr. Chair, but I do want to say I think ESA has been a critical tool, but I think it's important to recognize how we can further strengthen by doing some things ahead of time, like RAWA, which I want to work with all of my colleagues on before at-risk species need to be listed. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I yield back.